this stage of the game, we're cooled down in here. Oh, beautifully. We're sitting right around 100 degrees. And now that's a little warm for the yeast to go in, of course, but we're going to add some cold water into the mix here. So what we've got to do real quick is sanitize everything. I've got a pretty heavy duty bottle mixed up with some Star Sand. This stuff is fantastic. I should really own stock in the company, I say it so much. They say, don't fear the foam. It's something you'll see and hear a lot from home brewers. Very good advice. Foam's up, don't worry about it. This alone is going to sanitize perfectly well. It just takes about 30 seconds to do the job. Every little surface of the airlock should get hit. Just to be thorough. And then we're going to get inside. Our last step is going to be the lid. Got foam on most of it. Just going to make sure with one more pass. And now as that foam settles, we're going to get a little more fluid, which we're going to dump out just before we fill this up. At this point we can take the wort chiller out. Wort is the name for unfermented beer, and that's exactly what we've got, even if it's a little concentrated right now. Step here. Looks like we got the rest of the fluid to collect. All right. And this is cool enough that I can rest it right here. Open up the valve. Now if you're doing this in the kitchen and you just have a bucket, all you have to do is just dump the stuff in. No harm in that. The only major benefit for an extract brew to have a spigot like this, or a valve I should say, is it really aerates greatly by splashing it in. But even if you are just doing this on a dump, all at once, adding the cold water in up to the 5 gallons is going to aerate it perfectly well. Aeration is really essential for a healthy yeast. It needs the oxygen. This is the last time we really want any oxygen exposure to the beer. It really should be minimized from here on out. One of the interesting things here is you're going to see a whole bunch of junk at the bottom of the pot here. So now that the sludge is starting to kind of fill up and go into the valve here, we're going to call that a little bit of loss, and that's okay. That's going to help keep some of the, what they call it, the trube, or the boil. There's no polite word for it. It's basically crap we got to get rid of. A lot of brewers will argue that it does not hurt to have that go in, and technically that's true, but it makes it a little easier to keep the beer clean if it doesn't. So here we have some already sanitized and chilled water. We're going to add that in, bring this up to a 5 gallon mark. Perfect. Now, what we want to do is take a hydrometer reading, make sure we're about on target. There's not a lot we can do if it's really off target, but that's pretty uncommon. What we can do is at least get an idea of how much alcohol this is going to produce. And so we're going to grab a thief, a hydrometer. Before they come anywhere near inside this, we're going to sanitize it up real well. There's a lot of sanitizers on the market. Iodine is a great sanitizer as well, or specifically an iodophore. Star Sand just much more efficient, much easier to use. You'll note I'm wearing gloves though. It is an acid-based sanitizer. I don't really recommend getting it all over your hands. technically we're not in a clean room here, so sanitation is going to be a good enough thing. Yeah, eventually, if we gave this beer, once it's all finished fermenting and bottled, a couple years, it would probably start to spoil. Probably start to spoil in about 6 months, in fact. Most homebrews really should be consumed while they're fresh within the first 6 months or so. But we're minimizing the risk of infection by doing these extra pieces of care, by keeping everything boiled, etc. So, drop this in and get a sample. See a little bit of particulate in here, but the color is beautiful. Little twist. We've got about a 1.048, and that's right about in range of what we were looking for. There's a number of reasons that the gravity can be a little bit off. One of them is caramelization. You may end up with something that just sticks to the bottom of the pot, so you don't get all the sugars you're looking for. That's a common enough cause of problems. Speaking of little problems here, got a little bit of hop that's clogging up the works here, so I've just sanitized my gloved hand. Another useful factor for gloves. Well, these things can be a little pain too, but that's kind of the nature of brewing. Sometimes you just have to roll with it. Generally want to make a record of what your original gravity is, just so you can calculate, once again, what the alcohol will be once it's finished fermenting. As this is very cool to the touch, go ahead and put some yeast in here. It prefers about 68 degrees for something like this. This is a British ale strain. Certainly ferment it a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler, but you can change the profile of the beer. Just sprinkling the yeast on top is absolutely sufficient. These dry ale packages come with plenty of yeast to start fermenting pretty strong in really, really short time. And that's true of just about all of them on the market. In this particular case, we've got 11.5 grams of yeast here. That's, well, I expect this will be fermenting in about 2 hours based on my experience. So, last piece to do, now that the yeast is pitched, our airlock is sanitized. Flip over the lid and sanitize the inside of that. The Star San won't affect the beer at all. As I mentioned, it's an acid-based sanitizer, but it's mostly phosphoric acid. If we just let this part drip in here, you're probably going to get a great deal more phosphoric acid in your everyday soda. All right. Very carefully pour a little bit of water into this airlock. Maybe a little high, but that's just fine. The water will evaporate out over time, but probably not in the amount of time that it takes for this to ferment out. I expect the ferment will be done on this in probably about 5 to 7 days. At that point, we're going to be moving on to the next stage, which is a clearing stage, and then eventually bottling. So we're going to have to put this to rest for the next week.